Welcome to Crossroads. Rebellion takes many forms. Now look, counterculture movements, they tend to go against the social norms and the sometimes household values that teens especially might see as restrictive. But in China, a new type of rebellion is taking place. People are just giving up and they're embracing a low-pressure lifestyle. Now look, this is part of the lie flat movement or laying flat movement. And young people basically are just refusing to compete, refusing to push themselves, and they're oftentimes refusing to even work or study. And for the Chinese Communist Party, this actually represents a type of quiet rebellion against the CCP itself and to the high-pressure system that really they can't quell it. There's not much they can do to stop it. Now, Voice of America explains it like this. They say some young adults in China are unhappy with the culture of long working hours, high housing prices, and a very high cost of living. So the young people are, quote, lying flat to express their anger. They have rejected traditional goals like getting married, having children, purchasing a home or car, and following the corporate money-making path. It says lying flat, this movement, is known as Tongping in China. The Chinese online discussion website Jihu is filled with comments from young adults who have joined the movement. It says posters on the site say they choose to earn less and buy less to live more simply. Tongping is a rejection, it says, of the so-called 996 life in China, which is again, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week work schedule, which is the normal practice, it says, of working these hours, again, 6 days a week. It says the government-owned China Daily, one of the main Chinese state-run media, reports that Chinese officials worry about the Tongping movement, obviously. They say the newspaper said the government has long linked higher education and employment with wider social order. It goes deeper than this, we'll get into it in a minute. But it notes as well the website China Banking News reports the average monthly earnings of China's college graduates in 2019 was just over $777. So you even get to college, which is very hard in China, there's entrance exams and everything else, you're still not promised much. Now it notes the Chinese government reacted quickly to Tongping, as you might expect. In late May, the state-run Global Times published an opinion piece about the movement saying, quote, young people are the hope of this country and neither their personal situation nor the situation of this country will allow them to collectively lie flat. And notice that once graduates find jobs, many feel they're expected to work too many hours as well. And so even if you get involved in the rat race, the concern is you're going to literally work yourself to death. Now, the whole movement with this lying flat movement, it's similar in some ways to the quiet quitting movement we see in the West, only on a much broader level. In the West, you have a few movements like this where people are kind of collectively checking out of society. There's quiet quitting, as I mentioned, and quiet quitting is where you go and you do your 9 to 5, you work, but you don't really push yourself. You do the bare minimum. And this is hard for businesses to deal with because, do you fire people? They're still doing their jobs. They're just not pushing themselves to improve. They're not pushing themselves to do really well at their jobs or to excel. And so it's kind of a stagnating or even downward trend for the companies oftentimes. It's very hard to deal with. There's also, for example, the incel movement, involuntary celibate, where young men, especially right now, and they have femcels as well of women doing this, they just choose to not date or not get married and kind of give up on trying to build a life like that. Now, when it comes to the broader social level, of course, that can be destructive to the future of a society. But in China, where the Chinese Communist Party, of course, pushes people to compete and pushes people to try to, overcome their neighbors to some extent, and it goes deeper than this. I'll explain it a bit. This is something that challenges the nature of the CCP itself. And when the CCP notably is trying to revitalize its economy, which requires this type of high-level competition, if people lie flat, this is destructive to everything the regime is trying to do right now. Now look, It's also a type of revolt against what the CCP would call Neijuan, which is a type of communist revolutionary mentality. The idea of Neijuan is basically, as an individual, you are waging communist revolution. You as an individual don't waste a single moment. You're constantly fighting the revolution, constantly trying to overcome everybody else. It's this communist idea of struggling against man, struggling against nature, and struggling against heaven. It's the communist struggle embodied at a personal level. What this lying flat movement represents is a revolt even against that fundamental trait. Now, Business Insider says this about it. They say the idea of lying flat is widely acknowledged as a mass societal response to Neijuan, or involution, right? Internal revolution. And note that Neijuan became a term used commonly to describe a hyper-competitive lifestyle in China where life is linked to a zero-sum game. It says, according to Chinese news outlet CGTN, a viral photo of a student at the prestigious Tsinghua University studying at his laptop while riding a bike, right? He's riding his bike while studying on a laptop, best encompassed Neijuan, right? The idea that you don't waste a single moment, even while doing one task, you're fighting the internal communist revolution. It says the pressure to succeed renders the mere minutes spent on a short bike commute a waste of time. The constant struggle. And as that Neijuan goes hand in hand with China's 996 culture. The term refers to China's hustle culture, where people work 12 hours a day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Technically, they have like a 40-something hour work week, but the expectation is really double than that. And if you're not competing, right? If you're not fighting against your neighbor, if you're not competing with your coworkers, you're going to get left behind, and that's the way the system works. Now, it notes the 996 lifestyle was strongly championed by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, who got pushed out by the CCP, who once in 2019 called the 72-hour work week a blessing. It notes that long workdays are not only common but expected of staff, despite China's labor policy mandating employees not work more than 8 hours a day, right? Because again, there's the minimum, there's the law, then there's the expectation among the employers. You're working like a slave, even if legally on paper, you're just working 8 hours a day. And that's a poor enforcement of labor laws has led to rampant cases of overwork. Stories of people literally dying at their desks or suffering from depression and exhaustion are not uncommon. Now look, a key difference in China though, right, when it comes to quiet quitting or this lying flat movement, which goes beyond that, it's kind of all encompassing throughout your life. It includes even like things like not taking care of the elderly, for example, which is culturally expected in China and among many Asian countries, by the way. And so people are checking out of all of these social expectations. Everything that would be expected of them, they're not doing it. A key difference in China, though, right, when it comes to this whole movement, is that the CCP's communist system relies heavily on social struggle. It is a foundation of the ideology of the system itself. Competition is massive. Now, as we mentioned, they have the 996 work expectation. For students, there's massive pressure on scoring high on, for example, college entrance exams. And if you don't get into college, you're going to be a factory worker or a glorified slave or a bum. And because of that, of course, there's huge competition on studying, of kids going to school, studying, and then doing second school, where after school, they go to another voluntary school and they just study literally all day and sometimes all night until they go to bed. There's no life for them outside of the expectations. In business, imagine you go to school and you're studying like that. You get into college, you're studying like that. You get into business, it doesn't end. In business, competition and struggle are also extremely intense. So what happens, right? What happens when a system that depends on people pushing themselves to the absolute extreme where they're literally dying at their desks, or you have kids killing themselves when they don't reach the pinnacle of, the expectations, right? They say B is for bad, right? Only A is allowed. What happens to a system that depends on that, is its basic way of functioning, when people just stop caring enough to do it. Well, this is what's happening in China. And this movement, again, represents a type of internal rebellion, not external rebellion, which makes it very hard for the CCP itself to deal with. People within their own minds, within their own states, are just choosing to no longer push themselves. Now, the Soviets, notably, right during the Soviet Union and Russia, they ran into a similar problem. People, of course, under the Soviet Communist Party in Russia, they were dealing with absolute equality. You were assigned a spouse. Your husband or wife was assigned to you oftentimes by the government. You were assigned a job. You were assigned a role in society. You were assigned a house. Everything was assigned to you. They actually had the full, redistribution of wealth, and the incentive to become a doctor or to become a factory worker was about the same. And so people started realizing, well, why am I pushing myself? Why am I trying so hard? Why am I going to work and kill myself working at this factory job when it makes no difference whether I work hard or not? What difference does it make? And so they started having a slogan going around in Soviet Russia. They pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. They stopped trying. They gave up on the system. And in China now, this represents not only that, but something even deeper. Now let me show you how Chinese media are framing it, because the CCP is freaking out. South China Morning Post said that for months, the chatter surrounding lying flat or Tongping has permeated Chinese society, sowed discourse and become ubiquitous enough to finally warrant a public condemnation by President Xi Jinping himself. The very head of the Communist Party stepped out to address it. And it has to be big for them to do that because they'd rather not address it normally. He said, quote, "It is necessary to prevent the stagnation of the social class, unblock the channels for upward social mobility, create opportunities for more people to become rich, and form an environment for improvement in which everyone participates, avoiding involution and lying flat," Xi Jinping said in comments published on October 15th by the Communist Party's flagship journal on political theory, Qi. Now, it notes that his words address a trend that strikes at the very heart of his Chinese dream ideology. The China dream is the big slogan of Xi Jinping. The China dream is what you're supposed to aspire to, right? It's the idea that China is going to become the world leader, the superpower, a high-tech communist regime, right? That's the China dream, and it's embedded within, Xi Jinping ideology. Xi Jinping thought which kids have to study as if it were, scripture, basically. And notes that he has described this as a, quote, great revolution of the Chinese nation. And if people, of course, just give up on trying to achieve the China dream because they no longer believe it's, something you can realize or something that's going to make them miserable while they try to do it, well, the CCP's system fails. Now, this Chinese media notes, in the long run, lying flat could not only affect Chinese consumption and growth, notably the two big terms the CCP has right now to try to revitalize its economy, it says, but also lower the birth rate that is already eating up the country's demographic dividend and threatening its social welfare system, according to economists and social commentators. And let me explain how serious the birth rate is in China. For a long time, the CCP had the one-child policy. If you had more than one child, you would be fined. Sometimes they had collective punishment, where if you're, maybe not so much in the cities, but in the villages, if a woman had a second child or was pregnant, the entire village would be punished. And to avoid that punishment, sometimes the entire village would actually kill the infant once it was born. So the incentive, of course, to not have a second kid was very serious. They would literally kill your child in some cases. Sometimes even the doctors would do it. There's horrifying stories, for example. Of doctors drowning an infant, in front of the parents oftentimes, right after it's born. Now, because of this, right, the CCP has, since changed that. They make it so you can now have more than one kid. They still kind of cap it. But the problem they have is that because it's become culturally embedded to not want to have kids, and because the social pressure is so high, people just don't want them. And so they can't even make people have kids now. Imagine the effect of this generation to generation. Now, normally if you have 2 kids, well, it's kind of equal replacement, right? But when you have one-child policy down a couple generations, normally one child would have, of course, 2 parents and then 4 grandparents. But bring that up one additional level where, for a couple generations now you've had it. And then you have double that, 8 great-grandparents, 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. And that one child expected in his career to take care of all the elderly as they retire, once they reach that age, of course. That type of social pressure is very high for them. And of course, for the Chinese Communist Party and the idea of course, the expectation not only that socially the youth will take care of the elderly, which is even mandated by law to an extent by the CCP, because the CCP doesn't want to shoulder those costs. What this ends up doing is it makes it so the kid really is expected to kind of not only carry the weight of the whole family, but carry the whole weight of the country as they have an aging population. And so now that the CCP has reached the kind of, breaking point of that whole system, they're dealing with this problem where if people choose to not work, the workforce of the country essentially breaks. It's failing. They don't have enough people to work. And really, 10, 20 years, what's going to happen? Well, the economy is going to fail because people can't do it anymore. And that brings up a point again why this lying flat movement is so serious. If those kids who are carrying the weight of 2 or 3 generations just give up, what happens to the system? Now look, the article says here, it says that authorities have used all of the tools at their disposal to steer the narrative back toward the official line. The CCP is trying everything it can to stop this movement, but there's only so much they can do. Look, what's most interesting about this movement is that in some ways it takes advantage of one of the core principles of communism itself. This is a contradiction within the contradiction of communist thought. They're almost using a loophole, really, within basic communist ideology to tear down the communist system. Irony on top of irony. Karl Marx himself, right, of course, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx had the communist concept of from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And that concept is taken as kind of the foundational idea of communism, right? Everybody works. Some people are maybe more privileged than others. And so you want to have equity. You take a little more from the people who can achieve more and you give it, redistribute it to the people who maybe can't achieve as much, right? From each according to his ability to each according to his need. But what happens when you get to the late stages of communism? Well, what happens is, let's imagine like you're China, Chinese Communist Party, or even the Soviets before. You achieve communism, you have the revolution, you got it, right? Then people choose instead to reduce their abilities, right? From each according to his ability. You reduce your ability. And when you reduce your ability, you increase your need because you don't want to work hard and not get the benefits of the fruits of your own labor. And why do you want to support people who just don't feel like working? What happens then? What happens when those who have abilities just choose to not participate in the system and they choose to join those who get the free handouts without the hard work? That is how communism dies. Now look, this movement, lying flat, it's also turning into social memes, in memetics, right? Memetics, essentially, it's a concept. They're not just funny pictures online, right? A lot of us, when we think memes, we're thinking funny graphics and jokes and online things like that. But memes are a reference to memetics. And the concept of memetics is an idea that develops and evolves over a course of time to then impact the culture. And so memetics represent a type of cultural idea. You can't make them. You can't just fabricate a cultural idea. They need to capture something that people feel inside and present that in such a way that people can relate to it, right? That's the nature of memes and memetics. There's a memetic system now, or a cultural idea going around China that takes this idea of lying flat and makes it into a kind of cultural phenomenon. This is something, in other words, that is resonating with people at a deeper level than just some kind of surface or momentary idea. Now, one example of these memes, right, this mimetic trend going around is this movement called being more avian. And essentially what you have is these Chinese youth pretending to be birds. Let me show you a quick video of this.
今天做一只鸟，布布鸟，布布布布，布布布布，我脚长的。
啊！我不想上班，我要自由，我想做一只自由的鸟。忍不住化身一只固执的鸟，逆着狂风一直飞到底。
Now, it's a bit strange, of course, but this is something deeper. What the kids are essentially doing, they take their shirts, they pull them over their legs, they stick their hands at the bottom of their shirts, pretend to perch on something, and they let the sleeves of their shirt hang down as if their wings flapping, right? The idea is this. They're roosting. They're like birds. They just roost in their homes and they don't do anything. I'm a bird. I do nothing but roost, and I fly and I'm free. It's the idea that goes beyond, of course, just, a comedy thing, right? This hits a deeper cultural concept. This isn't just some random trend. It's a trend tied in with a deeper idea. Again, the concept of roosting at home, feeling the freedom of being a bird while taking up that whole simple life, right? Being freed from social pressure, being freed from expectations, being freed from the 996 work week, being freed from the entire system that demands of them absolute competition, the constant internal communist struggle and everything else. Them checking out of the whole thing and feeling that freedom and just wanting to roost and do their own thing. That's what this represents. NDTV said this: the bird trend on Chinese social media symbolizes a yearning for freedom. Many users, exhausted by intense studying with a demanding 996 work culture, fantasize about escaping the pressure to constantly grind. It says China's youth have a history of using social media to voice their frustrations with the work culture. It says the bird trend follows on the footsteps of Bailan, or Let It Rot, which emerged in 2022. It's originating in the NBA gaming community. Bailan signified intentionally losing a game with low winning chances, but morphed into a broader symbol of discontent with the demanding work expectations. Remember, we talked about this whole Bailan movement as well before, this whole garbage time idea, that the belief that the hope of the future is fading, and so just let it destroy itself, let the system go down. In fact, in the West, they even have this whole accelerationist idea. Let the culture become corrupt. Let it become bad. Let it collapse. Let it destroy itself so that we can rebuild something else, right? It's the same kind of idea, this kind of nihilistic mentality, to be honest, in some ways, but a belief that the system that exists is so broken that it cannot be fixed. It's a losing of hope of what is there. And a losing of hope to such a degree that you believe that the only way to fix it is to let it collapse, let it fall. And so what people in China are doing with this movement, again, the garbage time meme or even the lying flat idea, they're checking out, they're letting it do its thing. You do your thing, I'll do mine, I'll watch you fail. And of course, when they do this, of course, they're not really engaging in any kind of external revolt, although it is something that threatens the survival of the system itself. The goals of the CCP cannot be achieved if this movement continues, in other words. But how do you make people push themselves? How do you make people work hard? How do you make people engage in the communist idea? Well, you really can't. Now, this article notes as well that stressed out young professionals in China are turning to a new desk buddy, the banana plant. And while this may seem strange, why are people who work having banana plants next to their desks? It actually is something that goes along with Chinese language, right? It's stop banana green. And, in China, this is kind of a play on words. It's words that sound like other words, right? A homonym. And what they're really suggesting is it's stop anxiety, right? And so as a way of using this word that sounds like another word, they have banana plants, which is a subtle reference to the fact that they're stressed out. They suffer from anxiety. The work is too difficult. And so having this symbol that represents a cultural idea, again, a mimetic concept, right? It's a social meme representing something people feel inside. It's representing stress and anxiety, and they're having trouble dealing with their jobs, but they have a stoic veneer, right? But the banana plant represents what they feel inside. This anxiety and stress, and this understanding that the system is just too much for them to deal with. But the idea of stopping it, right? Stopping banana green means that they're stopping that anxiety. On a deeper level, it represents the same concept. Now look, this also I mentioned goes along with the idea of garbage time. People are essentially giving up on the system. And this ties into something important, notably when it comes to the CCP's various programs right now and this whole agenda to bounce back from economic decline, one of the biggest threats the CCP is facing internally. One of the key elements that's making that bounce back difficult, one of the reasons why the CCP can't just recover its economy, why all of its plans of, high-tech push and all these things is not working, is because people in China are not buying. Consumption is down. And the CCP can't get them to start buying and spending their money again. There's no internal circulation of cash within the ecosystem of the Chinese economy. And you need that in order for a free market system to survive. You need people to get paid, go to the store, go to the restaurant, spend their money, because what that does, it takes the money from your pocket, puts it into this business, they distribute it, of course, to their employees. The employees go to the other businesses, they spend it, that goes into the system, that goes into the pockets of the employees, and the trend continues, right? Money flows through the system, and that's the way a normal, healthy economy works. But when rather than spend their money, people put it in the bank and the bank is failing, or they go and put it under their bed and hide it, or they try to get the money out of the country, which they're doing, by the way, where they go and they buy foreign real estate, or buy houses with cash, or buy luxury goods that they believe might appreciate in value, or they buy gold or silver or diamonds in some cases. They don't want their money in the Chinese system. Well, what happens then? Well, you either have money stagnating because people aren't spending it, or you have money leaving. And with a system like that for China, it's not a big deal if it happens on a small scale, but when it happens on a massive scale, that represents a type of disintegration, right? A type of pulling away of the particles that allow a system to survive. And the Communist Party economically is dying. Partly because of this, because of many things, but partly because of this. Now, with other issues like, smaller and smaller workforces, the aging population, again, especially because of the one-child policy, all of this, aside from just the downward trend of the CCP, this is creating an additional pressure on the young workers. But people have a limit to pressure. People have a limit to the amount of work you can put on them. You can push people to succeed. You can push people to do well. You can keep, expecting more and more of them. But everybody has a breaking point. And for people in China, a lot of them have now reached that breaking point. And their way of kind of losing it, so to speak, is to just have this realization of, why am I doing this? Why am I killing myself working like this? What am I going to get out of, this type of work schedule that benefits me almost in no ways? Young people are not just checking out of work. They're not pushing themselves beyond the bare minimum of what could put a serious damper on all these things, right? They're not pushing themselves beyond the bare minimum. And for the CCP, this is a threat, notably, to everything it's trying to do right now. For the Chinese Communist Party, this represents a type of peaceful non-cooperation, as Mahatma Gandhi would have put it, right? This idea that you're not rebelling, technically, but you're rebelling internally. And through peaceful non-cooperation, you are making the system fail. Well, everyone, that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me know in the comments what you think about this whole lying flat movement. That said, also, please don't forget to share this episode. Help us get the word out. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.